Good Tuesday afternoon to you at 4 o'clock. Time for Sports4CLE. Thanks for joining us. Plenty of Browns news to talk about. We'll also talk a little Cavs a little later in the show. But we begin with the knowledge everybody has been waiting for. Jim Schwartz was named the Browns defensive coordinator, and Schwartz carries a pretty heavy reputation as a defensive coordinator. He has had top 5 run defenses, 8 years as a head coach, 7 of them as a defensive coordinator. In 2022, the defense he was a part of with the Titans, not only the best in the NFL against the run for the 3rd time in his career, 76.5 yards a game, was the 2nd best in Titans franchise history. He was also a DC back there a few years back. In 8 seasons as a defense coordinator only since 2007, Schwartz has produced 4 defenses that have finished in the top 5 in points allowed, 4 that have finished in the top 10 in total yards allowed, including 2 that have been in the top 5. 2 seasons in that span where his defense was top 5 in both. So the Browns get a defensive coordinator with a history of doing pretty good things. Let's welcome in Tom Withers from the Associated Press. Tom got his start here under the Bill Belichick coaching regime back in the early 90s. I liked it. That's the guy I wanted. What are your thoughts about Jim Schwartz?
Yeah, I'm still sorry that I didn't get to the interview process even. My candidacy was shot down immediately. So, those stats that you just showed, Dave, have to be music to Browns fans' ears. I mean, this guy, literally checks all the boxes that you would want. It's an experienced coach who's had head coaching experience. He's been a defensive coordinator, I think, for 12 of his years within the league. As you mentioned before, he began here in Cleveland. He gets Cleveland. And then I think what stands out more than anything else is the success that his teams have had in stopping the run. That's been the biggest problem for this Browns defense, at least this past season, and obviously for, I guess you could almost say, for the majority of Joe Woods' tenure here. It's been a challenge for them to stop the run. So I still do think there are some personnel and some scheme issues they're going to have to work through. But obviously he's familiar with the 4-3 alignment. Tough-minded coach, fiery coach. Again, I think it checks all the boxes, and I'm with you, Dave. Of the 4 candidates that they spoke with, he was number 1 on my list as well.
All right, so as you might imagine, we've been digging around trying to find stuff that we can tell you what this defense will look like under Jim Schwartz. Here's Jim Schwartz from his time in Philadelphia talking about how he puts a defense together.
Trying to find, what fits the players best. What's the best combination of calls? Every team's got a little different personality. Every defense has a little different personality, different strengths, different weaknesses. It's up to us to identify those, to try to minimize our weaknesses and try to emphasize our strengths. And, that's why we're out here every day. They're, not just out here, just trying to accomplish a scheme. As we watch, we're trying to figure out as coaches, hey, this is our personality. This is what we're good at. This is what we can hang our hat on. That opener counts. The first 2 games count. We're not waiting until the season to find out, to try to find out about it.
And Tom, I chose that clip because I thought that was lacking in the Browns this year. I think they were asking some guys to do things that just weren't their strengths. And I think that's been a problem the last couple of years.
I don't disagree with that, Dave. And in fairness to Joe Woods, I mean, they really got off to a rough start this year. They had the communication breakdowns in the first couple of games, and I think a lot of that was, not a lot of it, but a good portion of it was because he was trying to integrate a new safety in Grant Delpit into the system, was really putting a lot of trust and responsibility on Grant's plate. And as we all know, they had those communication breakdowns in the first 3 games, and they really never recovered from that. And then on top of that, you had the injuries at middle linebacker. Losing 4 starters during the course of the season is difficult. Anthony Walker Jr. going down, who was a leader on the team, and again, kind of that fiery personality that you need on that defense. So, unfortunately for Joe, things just never got on track, and he was constantly trying to plug one hole as another one opened up. So, yeah, I like what I hear from Schwartz there as well, Dave. I mean, I think it's imperative on a coach to take the personnel that he's given and use their best attributes to fit whatever defense it is you're going to try to play. And I would imagine what this regime is looking for in its defense is an aggressive defense one that's going to go after the quarterback for the other team, one that's going to flip the field for Deshaun Watson so they can score. So again, I like everything I've heard and know about Jim Schwartz. He's been in the league long enough that I've actually crossed paths with him a couple times, and I've always been impressed with him. And I think people need to realize too, this was the guy that took on the challenge of the 0 and something we know about the 0-16 Detroit Lions years ago, and turned them into a playoff team in 3 short years. So, again, has all the pedigree, has the background, has been a coordinator, has been a scout, has been an assistant, has worked as a senior advisor, which is essentially a front office position. So, he's done it all in the NFL, and I think the Browns got a good guy.
All right, this is kind of interesting as well. So we're going to take a look at percentage of usage of man coverage and where they rank in terms of the NFL. Schwartz's defenses were 8th in 2017, 17th 2018, 7th 2019, 5th in 2020. Joe Woods was 27th, 28th, and 29th. Or I'm sorry, 27th, 28th, and 23rd. And again, I think that kind of plays to some of the strengths because of the cornerbacks that you've invested, first-round pick, Denzel Ward, first-round pick, Greg Newsome, third-round pick, but your first pick, Martin Emerson.
Yeah.
You've got those are guys that want that. They want to they want to play man coverage and get after it.
I agree with you. I'd like to know, based on those numbers you gave there, how experienced the cornerbacks were that Schwartz had at the time. So, now, like you mentioned, you've got Denzel Ward with another season under his belt, Greg Newsome, who's a real nice young player who's had to kind of, take a few lumps along the way and learn as he goes. And I think we all saw in Emerson is a player that the Browns can be, a core player for this defense going forward. So, yeah, again, I think a lot of it came down to this year, Joe Woods having to adapt to, situations that were, sometimes out of his control. And I think that lent a little bit maybe to this team not being as aggressive, maybe not playing that press man-to-man coverage that I think people want to see. I know, even from my friends and family members who are Browns fans, I'd get screamed at on Monday and Tuesday about why is Joe Woods playing his cornerbacks, 7 to 10 yards off the line of scrimmage. They need to get up on these guys. So, Schwartz's reputation is to be a little bit more physical. Again, I think that year of experience for all those cornerbacks that you mentioned will do a world of good for this defense going forward.
I would agree. The other thing is he has a reputation of being somebody that communicates pretty well. So he's very tough-minded, but he's willing to talk about it and explain why he's not going to do things your way, if you will.
Yeah, I think he's that old school guy, Dave, that I think this young group needs. Now, I've also heard that he's a guy that in the film room, uses a pointer and tends to point out guys' mistakes. But I think there was several guys in this team that needed a swift kick in the butt this year, and maybe Joe Woods wasn't giving that for whatever reason. And I also think that with Kevin Stefanski, who's a very even-keeled, not exactly, Mr. Energy, at least on the sideline and what we see, maybe it's good to have, a little bit of that balance of more of a fiery guy in Schwartz just to kind of complement what you already have on that staff.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. All right, we're going to take a look at some of the things that this defense does up front. They call it a wide 9, and here is why. Take a look at where the defensive ends line up. Outside the tackles, and then take angles to the quarterback. Imagine Myles Garrett doing that. That seems to be built for a speed guy to get around the corner. We're going to take a look at the next clip again. It's, again, a video of the defensive ends. So this time, when you go wide, what happens is the tackles tend to overcompensate. And then you go into – I keep looking – Tom, I'm looking at these wide 9s, and I'm saying, Myles Garrett has been – he's got to be going, can we start this like last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago? Because a guy that has his athleticism – is going to be an absolute nightmare. How do you double team him if you're lining him up that wide?
Yeah, the only problem with that, Dave, right there, that what you're showing is that if that's Myles Garrett on that right side there's probably then a tight end and a running back waiting for him back there to double or triple team. So, and I think we saw a little bit, I'll be honest with you, I think we saw a little bit of that wide 9 look out of Woods. There were times where you would see Myles lined up really wide. And again, I think it comes down to, being able to trust your defense to put them in situations where they can take advantage of those matchup advantages. There were a few times this year, and I think we saw it for a couple of weeks with Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, where they would put him on the same side as Garrett. So to your point, Dave, once that tackle has to commit one way or another, one of those two guys is going to get free. So, I think for Schwartz, when he comes in, it's going to be incumbent upon him to kind of figure out what they have to work with, right? I mean, I think we've all came to realize this year that this linebacking core was, undersized. The defensive tackles who they were counting on to develop quickly maybe didn't develop as quickly as they had hoped. So, there's some personnel issues that he's going to have to address once he hits the ground running here.
Yeah, I would agree. All right, before we go to break, let's head to the voicemail of Truth and Reason for the first time today.
Hello, my question is if you've heard any feedback from the players on the Jim Schwartz hire, and if you think he'll keep any of the current assistants, and if so, who? Thank you. Bye.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. What I believe, Tom, is I think a lot of the defensive players will like this because it's an aggressive style of defense that I think the Browns are kind of built for.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100%. And we haven't heard from many guys yet. And I think as much as anything, Dave, that's a respect to Joe Woods. I don't think you want to, kick a guy when he's down, if you will. And so, I think there's probably a lot of players, making phone calls or texting today trying to find out, what they can about Jim Schwartz and what they should expect. But, yeah, again, like I said earlier, I think this was a really savvy move by the Browns front office in bringing a guy in with this kind of experience for a team that definitely needs a shakeup on that side of the ball.
Tom Withers from the Associated Press and I are going to step aside, take a quick timeout. Other side of the break, we'll head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason, talk about some off-season priorities for the Browns now moving forward with Jim Schwartz as the defensive coordinator. Sports4CLE, I'll be right back. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students, kindergarten through 12th grade, can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We continue talking Browns with Tom Withers from the Associated Press. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hi, this is Rico. I'm watching the wild card weekend, and I'm highly upset with the Browns. I felt like our team could compete with most of the teams that are in the playoffs. Anyway, there are teams that lost during the wild card weekend that are probably disappointed. But all the teams should feel proud of themselves for making the playoffs at the very least. You can feel the intensity and the concentration and the will from each team trying to win and advance. And I want our team to also reach that pinnacle of success, but consistently. In my opinion, from this point out, with a $230 million quarterback, the Browns must make the playoffs year in and year out, as long as Watson's under contract and barring any catastrophic injuries. Do you guys feel the same way? Thanks.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Tom, that's got to be the plan. They are in, I think they're in win now mode without question.
Yeah, I think I appreciate Rico's passion there. I think he speaks for a lot of Browns fans. This was kind of a wasted season, Dave, wasn't it? I mean, as I've mentioned on other calls and our other shows, this season was shaped by the Watson suspension. And, once it became obvious that he was going to be out for 11 games, it was, in my mind, it really kind of took you out of the playoff conversation. I thought it was going to be very difficult for them to kind of hold water until he got back. And then, we saw the rust that he had after the 700-day layoff and what have you. So, Yeah, I mean, they went all in last March 18th with this move. And so, they needed an elite quarterback. They went out and they found one, however people feel about, all the off the field stuff. But it's got to be win now. I mean, you've got a smaller and smaller window with your star players in Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward and Nick Chubb and Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller, and in my mind, this was kind of a wasted season. It's playoffs or bust going forward. And I know that's the kind of pressure that every good franchise should feel, right? That's how they've felt in Pittsburgh for 55 years now. And there's no reason why, Cleveland can't hold himself to the same kind of standard.
All right, so this is from ESPN.com. Biggest offseason priority for the Browns. Cleveland ranked near the bottom of the league in defensive rush EPA despite improving overall late in the year. Woefully undersized at the defensive tackle and linebacker spot, which allowed opposing defenses to pound them between the tackles. Browns have to beef up the run defense. And I think, we've alluded to it, Tom. Hiring Jim Schwartz is kind of the exclamation point to, we need to do that.
Yeah, well, based on what you just showed, I think we've hit on a lot of those same points during our talk here. Yeah, they've got to get bigger and get kind of nastier inside, I think, Dave. When we would watch this team during the summer, it kind of alarmed us when you think about how this defense was built over the last couple of years. And you go back to that playoff game in 2020 against Kansas City, and I think the feeling was in the organization was, hey, we've got to get faster. We've got to be able to run with these Chiefs. We need somebody who's going to be able to cover Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, who's no longer there. But I think this idea that they needed to get, faster at certain positions, particularly linebacker, kind of backfired on them because it made them small inside. And once teams realized that they could run the ball down the Browns' throats, we saw that week after week. I mean, there were back-to-back weeks where they gave up, 230 yards rushing to Atlanta. And I want to say Miami was the other one. I'm not sure who those back-to-back games were early in the season, but then that set the tone for the rest of the season. And teams realized that, if you can get 8 yards on first down with a run against the Browns, well, we'll keep on doing it. And they just couldn't stop it. And so, I agree with what you just showed there is that they've got to get tougher in the interior. They've got to rethink what they're looking for in terms of linebackers. And they've got to add some defensive tackles with some experience up front, and not only with experience, but big guys that have proven that they can stop the run because the Browns certainly couldn't do that this season. Yeah,
and Schwartz defenses typically will rotate more so than any 100%. Up front as well. All right, this is from Dog Pound Daily. 3 splash free agents the Browns should consider on the defensive side of the ball. Number 3, Javon Hargrave, defensive tackle. Number 2, Ibukum, who is an edge rusher. So that's Samson Ibukum. And then number 1 is an intriguing one. That's Jesse Bates, safety from the Cincinnati Bengals. And we've alluded to it too. He being Jim Schwartz, is going to want a true, quote-unquote, center fielder free safety as well.
Yeah, and I don't know what John Johnson's situation is going to be. I think he's got another year under contract. I know he's got a big salary cap hit, so there's potentially some movement there. I'd sign all 3 of those guys right now if I could. All really good players. I jotted down a couple other names. Daron Payne from the Commanders who will be available. Bates as well. Draymond Jones, the St. Ignatius kid that played at Ohio State, will be available. Dalvin Tomlinson. These are just all defensive tackles and defensive edge guys. And then a name that jumped out to me was Brandon Graham, who played for Jim Schwartz with Philadelphia on that Super Bowl team back in 2017, 2018. So, and as you mentioned a couple minutes ago, Dave, Schwartz is really big on having big guys inside, and he's got a rotation of 7 or 8 guys up front that he's going to continuously run new bodies out there. So I think that's the biggest change you're going to see in this team in the offseason. And even before Jim Schwartz got here, I mean, if defensive line wasn't your number 1 priority, then you didn't watch this Cleveland Browns team this year. It has to be priority number 1, 2, and 3, in my opinion.
Agree with you wholeheartedly. Tom Withers, as always, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Great stuff. Thanks, Tom.
Dave, my pleasure, man. Have a good one.
You too. Tom Withers, make sure you check him out. Always really good stuff for the Associated Press with all of Cleveland's professional sports teams. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, G. Bush, 92.3 The Fan, as well as the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Talking Browns here on Sports4CLE.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns here on Sports4CLE. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Hey, Dave Frank from Cleveland. Yeah, I hope Andrew Berry and Stefanski are watching the playoffs because he needs to see them defensive tackles. They're all raising havoc for all the games. And a couple things else. Restructuring contracts. Miles can get restructured. Ward, because he sure ain't earning his money. Watson, maybe even trade Ward. Wonder what we could get for him. I'd be all right with Emerson and Newsome at the corner, and then put A.J. Green in the slot. But the one other thing, I got to disagree. He calls all the time Rico. Good man. But we can't pass up a chance if we got DeAndre Hopkins. Him and Deshaun got chemistry together. As always, Dave, great show. Love you, brother. Be safe.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. Let's welcome in G. Bush from 92.3 The Fans, the Barbershop, as well as the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. G. Bush, defensive tackles have to get upgraded without question, and I think the guy they hired today will agree with that.
Oh, of course. Jim Schwartz is a guy who, you look at his track record and the guys that have played with him. We're looking at an individual guys like, Simmons in Tennessee. He had Albert Haynesworth with Albert Haynesworth, who was actually good, and Ndamukong Suh. You got Fletcher Cox. Those guys have all been multiple Pro Bowlers. Those guys are disruptive forces that they want to get after people. They get upfield. They do what they need to do as far as rushing the quarterback. And so I think one of the things that we look at is that the defensive tackle room pretty much is signifying that this room has to be upgraded. The position has to be upgraded totally because there's going to be a little bit of a different scheme. You're going to still hear people all off season talk about a wide nine and what is actually a wide nine defense and what does it do. And I think we'll have a whole lot of time to talk about that. But one thing that you need to know is that I don't care if you want to run a wide nine, a 3-4, a 4-3, 4-2-5, whatever you want to run, you got to have defensive tackles. And I think the Browns understood that they needed to upgrade that position. And this pick just shows that they were lacking something in the middle. They were lacking that force. And I think the caller's right. You watch these other teams play amongst other positions. You watch how the defensive line is able to get after quarterbacks. You watch how the defensive line can stop the quarterback, stop running backs with 4 people, and they don't have to run blitz every time. So this is what the Browns are looking forward to. And this is something that they're going to have to be creative in doing because they don't have a first-round pick. They're going to need to use all traditional forms, trades, free agency, the draft, and as well as looking to get people that may be on your roster to improve.
Yeah, I would agree. And the other thing is when you restructure a contract, it doesn't lessen the value of it. Normally what you're doing is converting, the salary into a signing bonus so it comes off the cap. So it won't cost them any money to restructure being the players. So that there's no worry that they'll be able to do that. Eventually that bill comes due, but they'll kick it down the can for a while. What'd you think of the hiring of Schwartz? That's the guy that I wanted. So I had said that from the beginning. Just your thoughts on Jim Schwartz as a DC.
I think it's a solid choice. I either wanted Brian Flores or Jim Schwartz. The reason I like Flores, I like his style of play. I like what he brings to the table, but you got to also look at it this way. Flores is a hot name, and Flores understands that he wants to be a head coach. And so I don't think he wanted, and we talked a little bit off air, I don't think he wants to be tied down to a defensive coordinator position, given the fact that he feels like he could be a head coach in this league and showing a track record of success in this league. So he wants to be a guy that's a head coach. And so if you look at the situation with the Cleveland Browns, you're saying to yourself, okay, what if the Browns don't perform as well as I would like? Am I going to still be here next year? You may find yourself in a situation where you're kind of outside looking in again if Kevin Stefanski and the whole regime gets kind of moved out because they're not performing next year. So I think that's a little volatile, and I think he kind of was he wanted to, look at all his options. So that was something that I was looking at from the beginning. But with Jim Schwartz, it's a little better of a fit, I believe, for the Browns as well as Jim Schwartz. Now, Schwartz is a guy I think he's in his late 50s. He's been a head coach with the Lions, been a head coach other different places, has not been a good defensive coach, or excuse me, not good head coach wherever he's gone. So I don't think there's a situation where he's going to be thrust in a position, even if the Browns do perform well as a defensive coordinator, that he's going to be a hot candidate name for getting another job in the NFL as far as a head coach. So I think if it fits a little much better, I think Kevin Stefanski will be more comfortable with Jim Schwartz, just given the fact that Andrew Berry knows him, given the fact that he was on a short list of individuals that the Browns were looking at when they would hire Kevin Stefanski. So there's some familiarity there. And he has a great track record with defense. I mean, he's been he has a Super Bowl. I mean, he's had top 5 defenses in Tennessee. He's also done his thing in Philadelphia. So I think it's a really solid hire. I think the Browns, they improved themselves just with the hire, because I think he'll go back. And I think some of the guys that we saw regress, some may argue JOK, some might argue Newsom, some may argue that Grant Delbert needs some cleaning up to do, and especially up front where you got guys like Perion Winfrey. I think he'll have a much better sound teaching regiment in teaching and getting young players to reach their potential. So I think from that standpoint, the Browns got better.
Yeah, I would agree that it's a different personality. He's a no-nonsense personality, and players talk about his communication ability. So those checks and boxes that the Browns needed. All right, you mentioned the wide 9. So let's take a look at this. We're going to take a look at wide 9 and it giving defensive tackles some room to work. And you see the ends on the defensive side of the ball are split out wide. So that creates some lanes, and there's a look at it again. That's what the Browns are going to run, is it's referred to as a wide 9. And what it does, G. Bush, you're familiar with it, it makes guys block. It creates one-on-one matchups, and you see that defensive tackle is winning his one-on-one matchup. We didn't see that a whole lot for the Browns this year.
No, we didn't see none of that. And we might add that you can't run wide. You can't get to the stuff you want to do. My defensive coach used to always say, you stop the run, you earn the right to rush the passer by what you do on first or second down, which means you got to stop the run to even get people in predictable downs and distance. So that's a thing as well, too. But when you look at it to wide 9, what it does do, it gives you an opportunity to everyone, and David Clowney, say what you want. He said sometimes there was a position where he felt like there wasn't an opportunity for him to get matched up one-on-one, just like with some of the other guys that we see on our defensive line. In that film, in that particular clip with the Bills, they had 2 good defensive tackles, and they were able to rush the passer. And they were able to do that because not only they were good, but look at the space they had to move. Right there in the nose tackle, he has almost a 2-way go. It makes the offensive lineman not lean on sliding every way, sliding left or sliding right. What it does, it gives you an opportunity to say, okay, well, my ends are out wide is everybody else, wide is the widest. And sometimes they'll even put that guy outside of a tight end. So outside zone, that's not going to be something you can run because you got guys that are already leveraged. They don't have to work to leverage. They are already lined up in leverage positions. And so now you have the guys that are in over the nose and over the guard. Now those guys can rush the pass rusher as well. Put your center on the island and say, okay, center, are you really great? All right, you're not going to be able to give a third eye on everything now because now we got our defensive tackles that are freed up on one-on-ones, and that's going to give you an opportunity if you have some athletic defensive tackles, guys you feel can rush the passer. That's going to give you an opportunity to get after the quarterback, and that's why the wide 9 is successful. However, I do want to say this. You do have to have the personnel to do it. As you said, that guy in the middle, he won his one-on-one matchup. It doesn't work if you don't win your one-on-one matchup. So that's the thing that we'll have to look forward throughout the year.
Yep, upgrades coming to that defensive line because you need it with the system that Jim Schwartz wants to run. All right, this is free agents teams should avoid in 2023, according to the Bleacher Report, and it's a name that we've kind of come to like here in Cleveland, Ron Payne. Plenty of plays in which the Alabama product disappeared. That inconsistency reflected in Payne's PFF grade, just a 58.4 in 2022. Payne has never earned a higher score than 68.2 in any of his 5 seasons. And again, like anything, G. Bush, it's what are you asking the guy to do? That's going to be reflective of the grade. Because that grade is, are you winning? Are you completing your assignment? Well, if you're asking a guy to jump through hoops to complete his assignment on one leg, it's going to be a little difficult. He fits a wide 9 system, does Deron Payne.
Yes. And sometimes when you're looking at guys you're between a rock and a hard place. I always say this, if they would have addressed the position last year, maybe they wouldn't have to go out and be as aggressive in free agency and look for a guy that can fit their system. However, when you don't get it 1 year and the guys that you drafted don't really perform up to snuff, they don't have the production, they don't have the PFF grades, then you're going to have to take a shot. Anybody that ends up in free agency is a gamble by default, right? Because if they were not, if they were completely sold on that person, if that person had no flaws, that person would be back with the organization. Or the organization has done a poor job in allocating resources and signing people that don't really show up or have production or not performing. Then you're like, wow, well, we can't sign him because we're kind of under the restraints of our purse strings. But generally speaking, anybody that ends up on the market, we've learned with Deshaun Watson, we've learned with some of the other players that we brought in for free agency, Odell Beckham Jr. or things of we traded for him. But anytime you bring in a guy who's available for trade or a guy that's available via free agency, it's not going to be a complete home run. There are going to be some flaws. There are going to be some question marks. But when you're in a position as the Cleveland Browns, who have underperformed for the last 2 years, the coaching staff in the front office don't have an opportunity or the luxury of saying, you know what, he's a little flawed. Does his motor run a little cool sometimes? Sure. We want to wait on, somebody. There's nobody to wait on. If you wait, you're going to get fired. So the Bleacher Report doesn't have to really deal with that. I mean, they can tell us the PFF grades is 59 and they'll go after him. But if you want to run that back with Taven Bryan and Jordan Elliott, hey, by all means, my man, go ahead. But you got to do that somewhere else for the PFF team, not the Cleveland Browns.
G. Bush and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out. Other side of the break, we'll take a look at some defensive players who are linked to Jim Schwartz that will be free agents coming up. We'll also head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Browns with G. Bush from 92.3 The Fans, The Barbershop, as well as the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. Let's head back to the voicemail of Truth and Reason.
Yeah, hi, this is Ron from Cleveland. I was just wondering if anybody had ever thought of maybe a position change for one of our players. And it all stems from John Johnson not being the player that we actually thought he would be. He seems to be pretty good talking, but when it comes to sticking his head in there and stopping people, he seems kind of hesitant to me, and he doesn't really follow people well in coverage. And the player change, I was wondering, has anybody ever thought of maybe Owusu Koramoah going to safety? He's very fast, has a real knack for knowing where somebody's going to be going and following the ball. I think he'd be a good defensive back and just a powerful asset in the run-stop game from the safety position. Of course, I'm no GM or anything like that, but, I was just thinking about it, and I'd like to know what you guys think about that. As always, love your show. Cleveland Browns forever. Woof.
As always, appreciate all the voicemails. G. Bush, I'm not so sure about that. it's an interesting point. Owusu-Koramoah, some people think he kind of fell to where he did in the draft because he was kind of considered a tweener between linebacker and safety. I think if you put good defensive linemen, good defensive tackles in front of him, he's a much more effective linebacker.
Yeah. See, there's a thing. I'll give you a quick story. When I was getting recruited, I was in that size where I was like 257. And they were like, wow, man, this guy, he's agile. He can move around. Man, let's try him out at outside linebacker. And I went to camps around. I went to Michigan, Ohio State camp. And, they have fun, standing you up and trying to do these drills. And my dad was just like, blatantly was like, no, you're not an outside linebacker. Stop it. And I was like, what you mean? And then I felt I really, really figured out why I'm not an outside linebacker, because they put me outside linebacker in these camps, and these running backs was running right by me. I didn't know where I was at. I was confused. Like, the thing about depth perception is this. Playing in space is not easy. Just ask a center fielder how much ground he has to cover when the ball's hitting the gap. I mean, you have to know where the ball is hit off the sound of the bat, right? And if you a second step late, you're out of here. You're done. And it's the same thing with outside linebacker and moving positions. Now you're talking about him playing safety. He's never played safety. He played linebacker or some sort of bandit role at Notre Dame. But now he has to play center field. Now he has to learn, quarterbacks are going to read your movement. Then he has to play cover. You have to cover hash to hash. Sometimes you got to cover one whole third of the field if you're playing cover 3. It's different. You have to have quick twitch hips. You got to have to be able to turn, run. You got to be able to not make false steps. You got to be able to come down in the run support as well. John Johnson may not be what we thought he was, but I will guarantee you this. John Johnson is exponentially a better safety than JOK. And that I'm sure of.
All right. I promised free agent defenders that have been linked to Jim Schwartz. We're going to start with some defensive linemen. We got 3 of them that we're going to run through. So you have Mario Edwards, affordable, nothing guaranteed, $1 million a year. Not a great grade, but kind of serviceable. Another guy, DeMarcus Walker. Again, not a big name guy, kind of would be kind of a rotational type of piece. And the third one is Javon Hargrave, and he's with the Eagles. And again, he probably is not going to be available. When you look at those guys, again, these are all guys that have played either with the Titans, the Eagles, or the Bills the one year that Jim Schwartz was the defensive coordinator with the Bills. Any of those guys intrigue you?
I like Hargraves, but like you said, I don't think he's going nowhere. What we learned this last year is defensive tackles don't grow on trees, man. To get a nice, solid, serviceable defensive tackle, even if you're in the PFF grades around somewhere between the 50s and 60s, those individuals are going to command some sort of dollars in the free agent market. And there's a lot of teams out there that's giving up on those type of players. So I look at those players, the Browns are going to have to try to either figure out the other 2 players that you mentioned before Hargraves. I mean, you're going to see, I would say, about 7 or 8 players of that ilk that will be available to the Browns. It's all up to Schwartz to figure out, all right, how do I go about making these players optimal? How do I go about making them the best they can be? And are they serviceable to what I want to do? Because, I also think about it. The thing that is combined with that, as you talk about with the wide 9, is the fact that you need a middle linebacker that can cover a large sum of area. Also, you need a linebacker that can come up and play the football and come up and hit too. So it's not just the defensive tackles that the Browns need to look at. Then they have to make an assessment on whether or not the young defensive end from UAB is going to be the guy that they're going to just replace with Jadeveon Clowney. I mean, you don't know. I don't know Alex Wright is ready to play like every down now. I don't know if he's going to be a 3-down player right now. So you got to figure out, A, what are you doing with those D tackles? B, are we going to have Anthony Walker back, who was a free agent after this year anyway, but he's coming off injury, a little bit older? Is Phillips a guy that we even still have some faith in, because it was a make or break year for him and he was injured as well. So there's a lot of Browns have to do in order to figure out what they're going to do defensively to shore up the run. But I think that there might be, I think for me, I don't know about how you think about it. I think the Browns may have a little better success in getting a receiver or a defensive tackle via trade rather than free agency.
Yeah, I would agree. Because the ones that you're going to want in the defensive tackles you're going to want are going to cost you a lot. All right, before I let you go, these are some free agent safeties that are linked to Jim Schwartz. And the Browns are going to need a true free safety if they play this wide nine traditionally like Jim Schwartz does. You got Marcus Epps. You see he's on his rookie deal. It's kind of intriguing. Another one is Andrew Adams, another guy that would be affordable. Again, these are guys that would be affordable in potential upgrades. And again, you're probably going to have a new free safety because that's technically the way that his defense shakes out. They don't have a guy that has the skill set on this roster that could play free safety the way Jim Schwartz defense needs it to be played.
I like Adams. I like him. I like what he's still on his rookie deal. He'll be cheap. I like what he brings to the table. I like more of a rangy type safety. And for me, I need a safety that can cover a lot of area and that can get to the ball. Some of the things with John Johnson to me is it seems like he was a little late to the party. And he, don't get me wrong. I think there's some of it that they have been missing, messing around and doing some different things. And I think they wouldn't. I'll say it like this. I think they played those guys out of position a little bit, and I think their technique was down a little bit too. From just listening to what they were doing, watching all 22, there's sometimes I would look at the game and say, I don't know what they're coaching up there. Like, what are they coaching right now? I mean, it's confusing to me. But there's one position. I mean, this is a long shot, and I haven't heard anything on the inside saying they're going to do it. But for me, the obvious choice would be if I have to play somebody like that and I got to move somebody, I would move Emerson. He's big. He can play the ball. He's physical. And I don't think Newsome is really a slot corner. Struggled there a little bit, hasn't had a pick. You can move him to the outside. You can move Ward will be there as well. And now I have a guy that I love with some size and some range with corner ability at safety. Now that is what I'm talking about in terms of a move. Now I ain't heard that, but you guys can take that and steal it if you want to. Jim Schwartz, just give me credit for that if you move him. I was the one that first said it here. You know what I'm saying? Sports of CLE. It was G. Bush first who said it. So just give your boy some credit for that one.
You started saying that, and I immediately thought Martin Emerson. So I'm on the same page with you. G. Bush, as always. Great stuff, man. Appreciate the time and the insight. Thanks very much.
Appreciate you.
All right, make sure you check him out, G. Bush, host of the Barbershop 92.3 The Fan, 8 until noon on Saturday. Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show, Monday through Friday, 11 to 1. We're going to step aside, take a quick time out. We turn our attention to the Cavaliers. Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter, straight ahead. Stay with us. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education program recognizes role model students and teachers from across Ohio. Nominations can now be done completely online. To nominate a deserving teacher or student, go to ohiolottery.com. In the About section, find Partners in Education. There you will find links to the nomination forms. Students kindergarten through 12th grade can be academic all-stars. Teachers can be honored as a Teacher of the Month. The Ohio Lottery Partners in Education, where stars shine. We turn our attention to the Cavaliers. They had a 10-point win, 113-103 over New Orleans yesterday to improve to 19-4 at home, 28-17 overall. The win was their 11th win of the season when trailing by at least 10 points. Let's welcome in Chris Fedor, Cavs beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. So, Chris, the good thing is they're coming back, but the bad thing is they're falling down by 10 and digging some holes for themselves in these games.
It's almost like you heard my question to JB Biggerstaff before the game in Minnesota, Dave, because I said, JB, how do you assess what that stat means to you? Does it piss you off because you've had that many games where you've needed to come from behind? Or are you proud of the fact that this is a group that fights and can overcome a double-digit deficit better than any other team in the NBA? And he said, Chris, it pisses me off that it takes that for us to do that. And the way that he phrased it is that he's going to get a lot of sleepless nights because of what this team is putting him through. But I look at it as like, this is who they are, right? They're a young team that's still trying to learn some stuff, and not everything's going to be great for a majority of the game. And they're going to have to scratch and claw and do a lot of these little things in order to consistently win these games. I think it's all part of their growth process. JV would prefer to have it a little bit easier most nights, but I think these kinds of experiences are going to be very, very beneficial for them. And it's also allowed them to believe in a different kind of way.
Yeah, the other thing is they have been banged up, and along those lines, Donovan Mitchell didn't play the entire fourth quarter, a groin injury. What's the latest that you've heard from him on him?
Yeah, Dave, I was told that Donovan was the one who asked out, too. Like, he raised his hand and said he needed a sub and he needed to go to the back because obviously something was bothering him in his groin. The Cavs are calling it a strained left groin. He did not practice today before the team left for Memphis, the game that they're playing tomorrow night, a showdown between two of the best teams in either conference in the NBA. And JB Bickerstaff said after practice today that he wasn't sure if Donovan was actually going to make the flight to Memphis. A lot of times when these guys get hurt and they're worried about inflammation and swelling, they don't have them travel because it just makes it a little bit worse. So everything that I have heard to this point in time is that Donovan is unlikely to play tomorrow night against the Grizzlies.
And again, they have been banged up. Nothing huge, but nicks, bumps, and bruises everywhere. So the Cavs and 76ers are tied for fourth in the East. 6-4 in their last 10, but they're only a half game behind the Bucks and the Nets for second. Celtics have separated a little. They've been kind of inconsistent as of late. Is there anything concerning, or is it just kind of the process of figuring it out when you got so many young guys?
I don't know that there's necessarily anything that's concerning to me. They're still a borderline top 10 offense. They're still a top 5 defense in the NBA. There's been some slippage on the defensive end of the floor. They've allowed the Memphis Grizzlies to pass them for number 1 in defensive rating, but it's nothing alarming to me necessarily. I think the two things that you look at, Dave, if you're a detractor of the Cavs and you're saying, they don't belong in the same conversation with Brooklyn and Boston and Milwaukee and Philadelphia, and maybe even flip it over to the Western Conference with some of those juggernauts out there as well, they can't win on the road. They're a completely different team on the road than they are at home, offensively and defensively. And it's strange because defense, it's the calling card of this team, and it should travel. It should be there, no matter if you're at home or on the road. You don't need to fuel off of the crowd for that. Your role players make more shots at home than they do on the road, but that shouldn't tie into your defense as well. Like, all of the principles and all of the things that you truly believe in on the defensive end of the floor should still be there and be as effective on the road as they are at home. It just hasn't been that way. So I do think it's in part a young team figuring it out. But if they want to be considered a legitimate contender, they've got to learn how to carry what they do at home on the road, and they certainly haven't proven that. The other thing that might give you a little bit of pause is that when they do play against these top level teams, and both teams are at full strength or close to full strength, for a majority of them, the Cavs have struggled. And that's something that they're going to have to figure out as well, because once they get into the postseason, once they get into March, April, and May, like, you're no longer playing against the Pistons and the Orlando Magic and the Houston Rockets and those kinds of teams.
Yeah, and again, a lot of guys in their second and third years. So let's take a look at Isaac Okoro's season split. So the first 32 games, 41% field goal, 22% three-point range, 4.4 points, 2.1 rebound. Now he's, the last 13, almost 50, better than 54% field goals, 48% three-point range, doubled the points. 3.5 rebounds, 1.1 assists. Cavs 16-5 when Okoro plays 20-plus minutes, and 12-12 when under 20 minutes. Now, the minutes played could also be a function of injury. But it's hard to argue when you're getting some offense because he is a defensive presence and can play some defense. He's an asset.
He is, and that's one of the things that JB Bickerstaff kept saying throughout the course of the year, even when Isaac was struggling on the offensive end. He's like, we all define value a different kind of way, and there are things that Isaac brings to the table, intangible things and tangible things, that I like about him. He's got a nose for the basketball. He fights through screens. He brings energy and effort on every single possession at both ends of the floor. He's very good in transition. He can cut away from the ball. So like little intricate things that Isaac was bringing to the table, even though his outside shot wasn't falling, and even though teams were largely ignoring him when they were playing defense and the Cavs were on offense, he still found a way to be valuable. And JB trusted him from the very beginning of the season until now, and he still trusts him. And I think one of the things that you see in those splits is Isaac has been inserted in the starting lineup recently. If you remember, at the beginning of the year, he lost his starting spot to Karis LeVert. And then once it was taken from Karis LeVert, it went to Lamar Stevens. But when Lamar Stevens went down and then he was sick, that opened the door for Isaac to step into the starting lineup. JB Bickerstaff liked what he saw, and he has stuck with, for the majority of the time, recently anyway, Isaac at the starting small forward spot. And I think that gave him a little bit of confidence. I think that allowed him to find his place offensively and defensively with these groupings that he's part of. And I think he's obviously going to continue to be the beneficiary of the defenses paying so much attention to Jarrett Allen and Darius Garland and Donovan Mitchell. And there are going to be opportunities for Isaac, whether it's shooting from the outside, cutting to the basket, finishing in transition. It's up to him to capitalize on those. And since he was reinserted in the starting lineup, he has capitalized on those.
Yeah, I agree. Basically, he has to punish a team for ignoring him. That's all. If he does that, he's an asset to the offense without question. Chris Fedor and I are going to step aside, take a quick time out on the side of the break. Some three-team trade talk. We'll also hear from JB Bickerstaff. Sports4CLE, be right back. Stay with us.
Come back to go forward. Back to learning new things. Back to pursuing your dreams. Tri-C has flexible learning options to fit your life. And every year, more than 1,000 local companies provide Tri-C students with real-world learning. The right education can boost your lifetime earning power by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Start now with a college education you can afford. Tri-C, where futures begin.
We continue talking Cavs with Chris Fedor, the Cavs beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. JB Bickerstaff talked about Darius Garland and what areas he's seen the most growth in from Garland so far this season.
He understands the game within the game, and he understands, when his time is and how when it's time to call his number, when it's time to get other guys involved. And he's dissecting the game in front of him more instead of just, kind of going out and letting his talent take over. He's being cerebral and he's thinking the game, at a higher level this year for sure.
We talked about that last year too, how he was learning the game within the game and everything. Does that just come from experience, or is that something that you guys can, look at in film or anything? Yeah,
you can, but it's one of those things, you can't force someone to learn it either. They have to take the time, they have to study it, and then they have to be able to apply it. And I think what you're seeing is Darius's ability to apply it.
And Chris, when I listened to JB Bickerstaff say that, he's kind of becoming an extension of the coaching staff on the floor, which is what all good point guards are.
It's so interesting, Dave, because Ricky Rubio and Darius have become very, very close. And Ricky Rubio obviously has been around in the NBA a very long time. And he's been given a lot of credit for mentoring Donovan Mitchell and Anthony Edwards and Devin Booker and Mike Conley and some of these other guys that have gone on to very, very big-time careers. And the latest is obviously Darius. And when Darius and Ricky talk, it has nothing to do with scoring or assisting. It has to do with organizing the offense, running the team, being a leader, stabilizing everything when teams start going on runs. playing the game within the game, like seeing things as they're coming before they actually come, like all those different nuances to being a point guard. And I think sometimes we lose sight of the fact that being a point guard in today's NBA is very, very difficult, especially for a 22-year-old kid who's only in year 4. And yes, Darius was an all-star last year. And yes, he got a maximum contract extension in the offseason. But it doesn't mean that he's learned everything that he needs to learn in the NBA. And I think this shows that Darius is still growing. He's still evolving as a player. He's still trying to find his place. And you see signs of him starting to figure it out. And you see signs of him understanding all the different intricacies of being a point guard in the NBA, the things that Ricky Rubio and JB Bickerstaff are trying to teach him.
So one of the areas that we've talked about upgrading come trade deadline, which is still a few weeks away, a wing that can play defense and shoot. So there's a rumored trade option with a 3-way trade that would get Malik Beasley to the Cavs, John Collins to Utah, Karis LeVert to the Hawks. Your thoughts on that? Is that something that you think the Cavs are seriously considering? Would it be a huge upgrade for them?
I don't think it would be a huge upgrade for him, Dave, but I do think it would be acquiring a better fitting player than Karis LeVert. And I think the Cavs have to ask themselves over the next 2-3 weeks just how much value Karis brings to the table on the court. And I think we understand the things that he can do. But at the time that the Cavs traded for him, which was last season, Ricky Rubio was injured and then traded in that same deal, and Colin Sexton was out for the year. So the Cavs were looking for something specifically from a stylistic standpoint. They needed a little bit of playmaking and they needed a little bit of scoring. They needed somebody to take the pressure off of Darius Garland in those two areas. The status quo has changed. The things that Karis does great, the Cavs don't need as much anymore. And Karis has been trying to find his place within this team. Starter, coming off the bench, ball in his hands, off the ball, defensive stopper, offensive isolation guy. And at some point, the Cavs have to determine, because he's going to be a free agent at the end of this year. He's on an expiring contract. So at some point in the next couple of weeks, the Cavs have to ask themselves, do we have enough of the things that Karis brings to the table that we like already? Or would we be better finding the things that we don't like about him and seeing if some other player out there can bring those to our organization, whether it's Malik Beasley, whether it's Tim Hardaway Jr., a guy that I've reported on the Cavs having interest in, whether it's Bojan Bogdanovic of the Detroit Pistons, another guy that the Cavs have interest in. You name the player. If the Cavs are going to move Karis LeVert, I don't know that they're going to get a better player, period. I don't know that they're going to get a more talented player, but they could get a better fitting player that does the things that Karis doesn't do. And that means shooting from the outside. That means catch and shoot. That means movement without the ball. And if the Cavs decide, like, that is what we need more of on this team, then I could see them moving Karis LeVert. But they're just not going to move him for anybody. And I don't think they're going to move him just to make a move. They like Karis. They like the things that he brings to the table. They understand some of the value that he brings. JB Bickerstaff clearly trusts him. And he has found a place looking a little bit better as the sixth man as opposed to the fifth starter. So the other thing to consider here, Dave, is Karis is probably the most valuable trade piece that they have. So if they're going to tap into that, they better get a player that is going to be like one of the 5, 6, 7 most important players for their playoff push in the second half of the season and for a 7-game series when they get to the playoffs. That's something they have to consider because they cannot, by rule, they cannot offer a first-round pick because they've given them all away.
All right, before I let you go, thoughts on Evan Mobley in year 2? How's the young guy doing? And again, a young 1 year in college. What have you thought of him?
I think he's been good. He's one of the anchors of the second best defense in the NBA, and I think you have to start there. Because Evan's the kind of guy, and I've been saying this for a long, long time, Dave, and I've been writing this for cleveland.com as well. It's not about production with him. It's about impact. You're going to look at his counting numbers, his points, his rebounds, his blocks, his steals, his field goal percentage. And you're going to say, well, wait a minute. Like, all those numbers are very, very similar to what he did as a rookie. Where's the progress now? Well, the Cavs are a better team this year defensively, in part because Evan's become a better team defender and because Jarrett Allen. But, like, even with some of the other pieces not being as great around these guys, they're a better defensive team. They're also a better offensive team. Donovan Mitchell's part of that, but I think the growth of Evan Mobley ties into both of those things. And I think the other thing to consider here when it comes to Evan, like, he's the 4th or 5th option on most nights. When you're the 4th or 5th option and you don't know how many shots you're going to get, you don't know exactly where those shots are going to come from consistently, you're not going to put up gaudy stats. So I think he's the kind of guy who impacts the game on a possession-to-possession basis and a nightly basis that doesn't always show up in the box score. And you have to go deeper, and you have to use the eye test. And my eyes tell me that on every single possession defensively, the Cavs could not function the same way that they do at the high level that they do if they didn't have both Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. It allows them to play defense a certain kind of way. And if they didn't have Jarrett, they couldn't do it. If they didn't have Evan, they couldn't do it. They both work together, and it works for the Cavs.
Yeah, and he does some things that just help you win. I mean, sometimes it's a shot, sometimes it's a pass, sometimes it's being in the right spot. He just seems to find a way to contribute.
Like, does he need to get stronger? Does he need stronger hands? Does he need to develop more of a post game? Yes. Does he need to develop more of an outside shot because defenses are starting to sag away from him and counters to some of what the defenses do? Yes. All of those things need to happen, and we can all admit that. He's 21 years old. You think that he's going to continue to get better and better and better. So what he is today is not who he's going to be next year or the year after or the year after that. In the meantime, even though he is a flawed 21-year-old player, he's still finding a way to make a big-time impact for a team that a lot of people think can be one team that goes relatively deep in the postseason. And that's a pretty good place to be.
Yep, I agree with you. Chris Fedor, as always, man, thanks so much for the time and the insight. Great stuff. Thanks, Chris.
You got it, guys. Anytime.
Chris Fedor, make sure you check him out. Cavs beat reporter for the Plain Dealer, cleveland.com. Always really insightful stuff. It's going to do it for this edition of Sports4CLE. See you back here tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Have a great night, everybody. See you tomorrow at 4 on Sports4CLE.